All right. People are hopping in. This app is really buggy. And we've been dealing with this for like a year and a half, this bug. So Elon is disappointing me greatly.
But based classical liberal Elon though, like it's really really good and based and fun.
Yes. So what were you talking about before I had to end the space in an untimely fashion?
Are you talking to me?
Well, anyone. I guess Xbox can jump back in.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
I can thankfully hear you. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I was just gonna say, being a Russian shill, I had a slightly more positive view of the speech than you did, but I agree with a lot of the criticism. I was going to say some stuff about, um, you conceded that like Putin's complaints about neo-Nazism in Ukraine or whatever. There's some substance to it. Um, I don't think it's like the underlying motivations of the Russian invasion at all. But I guess the question it raises to me is like, what was the purpose of the interview? if if this is for a Western audience, nobody knows what the hell he's talking about with the Azov Battalion and neo-Nazism. Nobody cares. This is very exotic, and it's like Western liberals who think in those terms. So like this Russian Great Patriotic War stuff doesn't play well with them, and they're
Yeah.
never going to be sympathetic. If this is for a Russian audience, that's kind of odd. I don't know how many Russians know or care who Tucker Carlson is. Maybe they think that this is good for Putin because he's getting good press with the West. Maybe this will help with negotiations with the future Trump admin. That seems kind of naive to me. I'm just kind of confused. Like, what was the purpose of the interview? I don't think it was a total disaster because I think Putin's a relatively erudite guy compared to most modern politicians, most world leaders. Maybe I know Macron wrote his like dissertation on Kant or something, so he's a bright guy too. But I didn't see the purpose of it, so that's why I can't really say it's a disaster because it's like I don't know what was the goal that it failed to achieve. What was the
Well, I mean,
point?
I think Tucker had his motivation. Tucker wants to be a world leader, I guess is the right word. He wants to be a pundit on the grandest scale. And he's achieved that to some degree at a certain cost, you know, um, promoting Alex Jones as, a brave truth teller. That has a cost to it. But he has remained relevant. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, some other Fox News hosts who got fired for, sending dick pics to his secretary or something. This person just becomes irrelevant almost immediately. And I mean, even Bill O'Reilly, who was bigger than Tucker on Fox, I think is largely irrelevant. I mean, he's still around to some degree, and he's not a totally unintelligent guy either. But he sells more books to boomers about killing Jesus or killing Stalin, killing O'Reilly, killing Tucker. Maybe that'll be the next one. A blueprint for anyway. Um, he is basically irrelevant, and Tucker has remained relevant by reaching out to the dissident right and Twitter and et cetera. So that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be the brave truth teller, but you could tell that he was offering leading questions, I guess, or just softballs where he was saying, what does it mean to be a Christian leader, or is NATO expansion the cause of this, or I mean, I think he mentioned UFOs at one point and AI, and he was just serving up these softballs, like just waiting for Vlad to just knock him out of the park. I apologize for the incessant baseball metaphors. And Putin just kind of bunted or something. Like he didn't say anything of interest about AI or UFOs or anything. It was just boring. And he just kept going back to the 13th century. And it's just like, okay, man. I mean, this is really just not of interest. Now, I'm sure Vlad wanted to get his side of the story out, and he felt that this was the best way to do it. But again, it was just so dank and musty and archival. and just obviously self-serving, that I don't think he really caught the ear of anyone new. I mean, it's like the people who like this are like, oh, for greater economy, we should be rational and work with Russia and cheap gas. And I mean, are you really trying to reach these people? This is your chance to reach the masses, or set a fire, or justify yourself. And I just think he failed, just utterly. I mean, one of the people who's one person who's Russian by birth, who's in my Substack group, he was saying, and I've heard this elsewhere as well, but Putin is just isolated, and COVID isolated him even more. And so there are surely people in Russia, propaganda types, who could have told him how to, best use this opportunity. And I just don't think he listens to them. I think he probably, reads these books, looks in the archives for various things. I think he's very out of touch, and that's kind of sad, actually.
Can I jump in on this?
Sure.
There's like another thing with I do think this is like fairly recent that it's become a little bit out of touch and uncharismatic, because I do disagree with what you talked about earlier about him being like a fundamentally uncharismatic figure, because he was
two quick questions.
hang on.
Whoa,
white men
whoa,
are
whoa, whoa.
speaking. White men are speaking.
I think he might
just
not be able to hear, but keep going, Labrat.
Yeah, he was like if you look at like the early history of Putin, like he was very much like a product of the TV and like the oligarchs' TV, where they like promoted him when he was prime minister during the second Chechen war as like a strongman, and like the famous lines of "we will like rob
there
the
was a
terrorists out of the
documentary
outhouse."
as well. I learned this in Philip Short. There is a documentary
Yeah.
about him being, the man behind the revival of St. Petersburg, is what I believe it was. But again, remember, you can make someone compelling and interesting if you have the power of television on your side. You can cut out all the bad parts, great photography. You can make someone interesting. The question is, are you compelling on your own? And again, to go back to Trump, I find Trump's speeches to be, appalling or maybe hilarious unintentionally. But he obviously is just up there on stage talking about toilets and Nancy Pelosi, et cetera. And he just holds the crowd. And, I can't imagine Putin doing something like that. Everything seems overly stage managed and boring. Another aspect, I think I learned this from one of these guys, another expat. He's on YouTube. I'm forgetting his name at the moment. He's a very thoughtful guy. He claims to be a Nietzschean, but he strikes me as a bit of a liberal. But he was basically saying that when they do these mass rallies, they're trying to reach a certain audience. Like, if you're too smart, or if you're too much of a nationalist, Putin's going to crack down on you. You can say that you love Russia with your entire heart. He doesn't want to hear that. He'll bring people to these rallies who are like civil servants or teachers or nurses or something. Like, he'll bring, nothing against these people, but he'll bring a kind of like mid-range type of person who's, kind of all in to some degree, but not really all in, kind of depoliticized. And they just kind of vaguely like Russia in the way that someone might vaguely like their football team of their city. And he doesn't like people. I mean, if some of these people who are in prison right now are in prison due to the fact that they are a little too intellectual, a little too nationalistic. Navalny is an excellent example of this. And he's a nationalist. He's a kind of racist of some kind. And Putin doesn't like that. He doesn't want you to be too excited about Russia. He wants you to be depoliticized. So it's kind of the opposite of the American situation, where both parties want you to be almost hysterical. It's like Trump is a fascist and he's crazy and so on. Biden, he's a communist, or he's totally out to lunch and senile, and he wants to make you trans, or they want to get you on the team. And I think Putin is almost the opposite of that. He wants you to be on the sidelines as opposed to being out in the field.
Like one thing I thought was quite interesting with this interview is that like I think it's become like noticeably like a lot more uncharismatic compared to like the 2010s. I don't know how much you watch RT in the 2010s. I know you've been on it like during that period.
Yeah,
but
that's when they liked me.
Yeah, but anyways,
I was
like,
useful.
like
Useful idiot, perhaps.
They would like have these like clips of Putin where it's quite compelling. These like short clips and where he talks about how like oh, the West is like bombing Libya and Iraq and destroying these countries. What is their right to do that? And he would say stuff which would come across as quite sensibly and quite charismatic. Where nowadays he's just like this old Russian grandfather who just sits and like talk about history for an hour. It's like quite. I mean, it's a lot. He's almost like senile.
I mean, kind of.
Come in here.
Yeah, I'll go to Jeff, and then I'll go to Jeff first, and then I'll go to Brennan next. Jeff.
Hey guys, how are you?
Doing well.
I'm on a walk outside, so you may hear outdoor noises. I thought you had a good take, Richard. I agreed with most of it, and thought I would offer a little of my analysis, which I'm not a fan of Putin, and I'm pro-Ukraine in the context of the war, but just in terms of an objective analysis or an attempt at one, I think the fact that the interview happened at all was an information ops win for Putin. So I think we have to acknowledge that, and how much attention it got, and what a middle finger it was to the Western establishment. But that being said, like, you're completely right. Like, a 2-hour interview, he completely miffed it. And he not only, the primary distribution platform for is X, but like you, I think, said, he has no sense of what content works on X. And then his intended audience, like, I think this was your point, like, he didn't have any clue what his intended audience wanted. So I think he completely miffed, and I'm glad he did, on the content. By contrast, I looked at Dugan's post. Or actually, back to Putin, I had the same conclusion, where it looked to me like Russia's generally pretty good at information operations. Like, clearly he's not listening to advisors, or doesn't have good advisors. So he does seem isolated and was driving this by his own personality. And then by contrast, Dugan, his tweet about the interview, I mean, that was very like strategic and conniving. And I read that and I was like, I'm glad he's not advising. And Putin,
what did Dugan say?
Dugan was he was driving a wedge. I mean, he was criticizing the liberal Western Marvel comic book portrayal of the world, and then he used his own Marvel comic book portrayal, where liberalism is like evil, and he wants to divide the West from the Western liberals versus the Western conservatives. And he's like, Russia's actually friends with the Western conservatives. He actually named names in it, including Elon Musk, which I thought was very interesting. Let me pull that up right now.
That's fascinating.
All right. So it's totally fascinating. I highly recommend it. It's called Tucker, Putin, and the Apocalypse. Like, how Dugan is that? I mean, the guy's kind of like this Nosball loon, in my opinion. Yeah. But it was way more conniving. And you can see what he was trying to do was to say, hey, American conservatives, like, we're your real friends. And it was much more, I mean, if you want, I can read it, but that might be overkill. I
get the gist of it. And this is what I would say. I think a lot of Putin defenders would probably say, oh, he doesn't care about American conservatives, and he wants to deal with the West rationally. He's such a good guy or something. Well, okay, but that's not actually what Russia has done on a propaganda, in their propaganda efforts previously. I mean, Dugan, I think to say that he's Putin's brain, or he and Putin drink coffee every morning, that's obviously incorrect. But he is connected in some way. It's opaque. How deep is he? I don't quite know, but he is part of it. He's a supporter. Dugan always goes after the right and the dissident right of all various shades. He'll support the truckers in Canada. He'll support the farmers in Germany. He'll support anti-vax stuff. He's reached out to people like myself or Guillaume Fay when he was alive, who's a European imperialist. I mean, there's actually, I've seen this, in fact, something from Putin that he wrote, and this was probably like 10 or 12 years ago, but he did a list of the various factions on the right. And he's like, we have the hardcore libertarians, we have the survivalists, we have the Euro kind of leaning, white nationalist intellectuals, we have the hardcore white nationalist kind of Southern racist type. So he knew all of these things because he'd studied it. He'd probably spoken with many of these figures. Yeah. And I think I'll finish up real quick, and then I'll let you speak. I think that's actually smart. What you're doing is you're stirring things up in enemy territory, and you'll just see where this goes. Maybe the trucker movement will fizzle out, but maybe it will cause instability in Canada, and that helps Russia. So it's actually smart propaganda. Now, should Putin have just gone all over the top? Probably not. But I think he should have done that. That would have, from his perspective, not mine. I don't support Russia, period, end of statement. But from his perspective, that would have been actually powerful.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I was like, it's a good thing Putin is not taking advice from Dugan, because Dugan knows his stuff. He speaks in this fantastical language, but it does work. And his overall strategy, I think the thing that
we're overinflating
by the way,
Dugan quite a bit, guys. He's kind of a running joke in the Kremlin.
Don't interrupt.
Let you finish.
Yeah, his by the way, his Twitter feed is full of Arctos media or whatever. Yeah, I mean, his thinking is anti-hegemonic strategy, and I think what people on the American right need to realize is his reaching out to the American right is just purely tactical, because that's where he sees accurately sees a place where you can, a wedge that can be driven. 10 to 15 years ago was the Occupy movement.
Yeah.
So they're no friends. They're no friends to people on the right per se. It's just a strategy that's smart from their standpoint of trying to advance their anti-hegemonic, quote unquote, and multipolar strategy. So I think Dugan's actually quite smart and conniving. Putin, I was, like you, not very impressed by his performance.
Yeah.
So,
and look, Zag, I agree. I would agree with your statement that in the West we overinflate Dugan's influence. The reality is he was expelled from Moscow University. He doesn't actually have a PhD, but he was teaching in some capacity. After he said kill, kill, kill with regard to Ukrainians. But, I guess what I would answer to that is maybe that's to their loss. What boring, tedious figure is actually working in the Kremlin? Whatever you want to say about Dugan, I don't think you should. I would never say that he's not powerful or influential. He is. And maybe even
he's
so
it's
maybe they should be listening to him.
He's an export commodity. But to what Jeff said, I agree with the last part, that if you look at when the neocons were warmongering, the Kremlin was appealing more towards the Hillary Clinton Democrat. And that's how a lot of their relationships were established, with Uranium One. And then when the political wind shifted, like they have in the last 6 years, sort of looks to the conservatives, who are the anti-war, anti-imperialist party. So it is all calculated, and it's true. There really are no friends. The Kremlin's not friends with the American right or the American left. It's just whoever they can work with at that time. basically to stop NATO expansion.
Right. They want to stop it now that they're not allowed in it. How rude. Brennan, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, sure. So, I was asking myself this question whenever I was listening to Putin. Who is his audience? And I really didn't come up with a specific answer, but I did think a few things, and I wrote some notes whenever you were talking, and then some notes on what I saw during the interview. So you described him as cold and uncharismatic, and I wouldn't say that would have been inaccurate, but I also think that there's a little bit less of a Russian ideal that I've ever seen for this emotional funny man who's the strong man and the leader. There's this kind of emphasis on playing your cards a certain way, and whenever I've seen his previous interviews, and I've seen a lot of his interviews, he seemed much more relaxed in his international interviews, and he seemed less at ease in this specific interview, very, very tightly controlled. My note, actually, I wrote down, I started to ask myself, does he have some psychopathic tendencies from how he responded? And I'm not saying that as a downside. I'm saying it's the same thing that you see with the executives that are making cold decisions.
Keep going. I love this stuff. I love amateur diagnoses of world figures in terms of personality disorders. I'm totally into that. So keep going.
Okay, but it's not that. But I have known a few people with psychopathic tendencies, and that's why I say that. The other thing is, whenever he was talking, I listened to who he talked about as if he was willing to say, I'm open for a trade, but I'm not making a trade. And the way that I took it was he was talking about a potential splice of Ukraine. And the other thing that I took about that was, who was he mentioning whenever he was talking about, people being victims of the fascists and how much he was on a crusade against anti-fascism. Well, he mentioned his regular mentions was the Poles and the Jews. That's who he mentioned repeatedly, and I thought it was really, something to think about, and that is maybe that personalizes or humanizes Putin a little bit more, and that is, his brother died in 1942 during the siege of Leningrad by the Nazis. So his perspective on it is going to be a great deal more personal, considering how much the Russians have historically lost to unchecked aggression. And then one other point too, and I'll make that, and that is, I've been looking at some of the past Russian wars, and probably the what people describe as the most beautiful graph ever to describe a war is Napoleon's march to Russia. And what was the defense of the Russians? And the defense of the Russians was really defense through space. And you've seen that in this war. And it also, I think, gives a hint of, for all intents and purposes, he does have all these historical arguments, and they may be true, and I think that they are true. But more importantly, do you really want to be 8 miles, or I should say 8 hours driving distance from NATO? That would be the case if Ukraine fell.
Right. So in terms of the psychopathy, I would suggest this. I mentioned this in the context of Ron DeSantis, in fact. There's this notion of the mask of sanity. And this actually comes from a book that you can find online. And it's written by Cleckley, is actually his name. He's not very well known. Really brilliantly composed book. And he was a clinical physician. And what he stresses, and there are later things like the Hare psychopathic test and revised and all this kind of stuff. What is stressed in The Mask of Sanity is that a psychopath is not going to strike you as crazy as we use that word casually. That's someone who is hearing voices, a schizophrenic, someone who is maybe has some other kind of mental disorder due to an injury or something like that. The psychopath is probably going to you're going to perceive the psychopath as almost cold, because there's no there. There's no empathy. Like, he's not able to walk in your shoes or feel your feelings in the way that humans and mammals, in fact, can. So it's that he has a dysfunctional limbic system. And so his response to this deprivation of feeling is a mask of sanity. So he's able to read books. He's able to read people. He's able to pick up on memes, you could say, and repeat them in a kind of rote manner. He might even be able to give off or generate facial expressions in a rote manner, like someone learns piano by rote. They don't really understand what they're playing. They might not even be able to read music, but they can just, force their fingers to play this thing almost like you're using a typewriter or something. That's what a psychopath does. And I think it's fair to say that most politicians, at least in the West, are narcissists. I think it's fair to say, of some kind. Obviously, Trump is a narcissist of the grandest kind. But I think it's worth speculating on the notion that autism might very well be at play here with Vladimir Putin. But I wouldn't be against the fact that he's a high functioning psychopath, in the sense that, I'm complaining that I don't really understand what he's talking about. I don't understand what motivates him. I don't understand what his vision of the world is. I mean, you're a world leader. Surely you, of all people, should have one, Vladimir Putin. But I don't think there is any there. He might very well be empty. And that's expressed by his flat affect. There's nothing behind it all. And what he has are like some big 1,000-page history book that he read and that he can just kind of recite by rote. And so I think that's probably a better insight into who he actually is, which is that he's nothing. He's a hollow man. There's nothing behind the eyes. There's just this mask of competency, which he surely is competent, and there's a mask of like historical tidbits that he can recite ad nauseum. I think that's my impression of
Could
Putin.
I take over from there, Richard? Because that kind of dovetails with my point quite well.
Yeah, go for it.
So I think it might have been Xbox earlier on, said, well, it's hard to classify this as a failure because, we can't discern what the aim was. I don't really buy into that as like a worthwhile equivocation. I mean, the aim was obviously to embarrass the West. I think Jeff may have a greater idea than I do that actually succeeded. But what I kind of saw from my perspective is that we just saw Putin as like an impotent theory cell, if you know what I mean by that, and subsequently that's why it's kind of energized certain parts of like the online right and the online conservatives, because that's their model for progress and goodness and value. But I don't think that equates to anybody else. So I don't think this was a success, because I don't think it was an embarrassment to the West in any serious sense. It was just more impotence. And to be honest, I'm going to be fair, it's a similar impotence that we see in the West. I just think this, what we kind of have going on, and this may sound a bit sort of, woo-woo, but it's a perennial situation of complete vacuous emptiness. And I think that's kind of just dovetails with what you were saying in terms of how he just affects these influences and these rhetorics, and even down to like body language. It's all an affectation, and yeah, I mean, he's no different from his Western enemies in that respect. To be honest, that's how I kind of see it. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. The body language is fascinating because he walks with his straight arm, and he swings his left arm, and that's a kind of KGB affect. You can see that with Medvedev as well,
Right.
whom Putin knew back in the day. It's basically having your like gun hand at the ready. It's a kind of funny thing.
Could I ask you two? Could I ask you two quick questions? Because that's actually what I had my hand up for.
Sure.
Do you think this would have been more effective overall if it had happened sooner after Tucker left Fox? Because I think we both agree that Tucker's kind of killed himself with just how boring he is over the last, how long has it been? Like 9 months? I can't even remember.
Like
and secondly, obviously, because I've been in your spaces quite a bit, and you were talking in the past about should the FBI be looking into Tucker and what exactly is going on here? I kind of think after this interview, I think there's something kind of fishy going on here, and I think that he should probably be investigated. I just wonder what you think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Tucker has remained relevant. I think at what cost? I mean, it's like when you're reaching out to Alex Jones and Alex Jones's audience, that's fine. I mean, there is a big audience there. Remember, Alex Jones was getting more listeners than Rush Limbaugh in the 2000s. I mean, there is a big audience, but do you want that audience? And are you sacrificing all credibility to reach that audience? I mean, I think that's just a question for Tucker. He might answer that yes. That's where I want to go. Okay.
He'll be retired in 20 years anyway. It's all the same difference sort of thing.
Yeah. In terms of the FBI, I mean, I noted that matter about Hungary. Knowing Tucker's father's connection to Orban, and he brought up this kind of curious question. I mean, it's not something. If I had the opportunity to get Putin, for an interview, I that would not be a question I would ask him. And I don't know. What does that say? Is there some sort of insider knowledge? I think it's worth investigating. And, I don't know what's going on. I mean, it's kind of like with Trump and the documents, and it's funny because recently Biden is not going to be prosecuted for this crime because he seemed to be well-intentioned, and the jury would see him as this doddering old man and not want to really convict him. But with Trump, it's more curious. Like, is Trump just a hoarder? Is he just a total fool who wants to show off top secret documents to Kid Rock or something? Is it kind of illegal, but then in a way kind of innocent in the sense that it's stupid?
It's not malicious. It's not malicious. Right. Yeah.
Or is it actually entirely malicious? And has he been giving out this information already, and that explains the Saudi investment in Kushner's hedge fund? I mean, there are important questions. And I think with Tucker, it's like, is he just trying to get clicks and trying to be the alternative media icon? Or is there something more sinister going on? I mean, I would definitely investigate him if I were the government. Just saying.
But to be fair, though, I mean, the situation with like the Hungarians in Ukraine has been going on since like the mid 2010s at least, probably a lot longer. So I do think it was like a legitimate question. But on another hand, it does speak a lot that Tucker Carlson seems to be like more like well-read about this sort of conflict in like this sort of like ethnic dynamics between Hungarians and Ukrainians than Putin himself, who didn't seem to pick up on it at all, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah. And Putin seemed to imply that Tucker was a CIA agent. I mean, or he was making fun of Tucker for not getting into the CIA. So he mentioned at one point, the CIA, this company, very vicious people, but some of whom are good, I presume. you were not allowed in, I understand. And I've heard that as well. I mean, it's probably, I don't think Tucker confirmed it. It was probably something he wouldn't want to confirm, you didn't get into the, to the school or
I
whatever.
mean, that part was like really funny. He basically calls him a retard because he said like, yeah, the CIA, which you tried to get into but didn't, luckily.
Yeah,
so
but
I mean,
kind of interesting. But what was he
yeah,
implying? What might Putin, when he said at one point as well with Nordstream, they were like, "Who did Nordstream?" And he said, "I don't know, you." And I don't know what little game, like subtle game that Putin was playing, but he both was making fun of Tucker, but also maybe implying that Tucker is CIA. Now, I don't, possible, I don't buy the notion that the CIA really wants this to happen. I think that if the CIA wanted to engage, like wind down the war and engage in outreach towards Russia, I think they actually would have sent like Christian Amanpour, some like older, totally established mainstream journalist who no one thinks is a Russia shill or something. And so it would be a kind of like regularizing of relationships. I mean, I don't think it was like glaring in this respect, but I do think that the takeaway from this is that Putin, or excuse me, Tucker is a Russia shill. I mean that seems to be just a kind of obvious takeaway. You fly out to Moscow, even though there's a travel warning, an absolute travel warning, no go zone. You fly out to Moscow, you let Putin spout off Russian propaganda for 2 hours, and then you go home. I mean, that is one just clear takeaway. And I don't think the CIA would do that.
I have
I
like a
don't know.
conspiracy theory about this. Is that I don't have any evidence for this, but I would almost imagine that, let's say there's like a CIA mole in like close to Putin in like the Kremlin, and this like mole has said to Putin to, oh, you should do this interview with Tucker Carlson, and you should talk about this stuff which the American audience has like no interest in. So you don't talk about like tranny bathrooms and fighting wokeness and NATO expansion. What you do talk, he did talk about NATO expansion, but he didn't talk about wokeness. You do, so what you basically do is like you bore the American audience. So Tucker Carlson will look like a FSB agent or like a Russia shell, completely without integrity. And Putin won't get anything like popular support in exchange for that either.
Yeah.
So
he'll look reasonable because he's like overly academic or something. I mean, look, you can kind of spin it in a number of different ways. I'm just not convinced by any of these theories, really.
Yeah,
yeah.
It makes sense though.
I don't know. I don't. I mean, it's interesting. They say you never leave the CIA, which is fair enough. But if you apply and don't get in, do you never leave? I'm not sure I buy that exactly. I just don't think the CIA wanted this to happen. But who knows? I might be wrong. Maybe they want to make the right, and Trump look like a bunch of Russia shills by allowing this to happen. I mean, you could say that. I'm just not terribly convinced by any of these theories, which are theories. We have no evidence for these claims.
Exactly.
Jeff, you wanted to jump in again?
Yeah, sure. A couple things. I mean, one thing that struck me in the aftermath of the interview is I think we'll look back at this as when like all the Russia shills kind of came out of the closet. Not that it wasn't always somewhat obvious, but what struck me is just how open air a lot of the Russian influence, quote unquote, you could say, has become. So I thought that was interesting and struck me. Regarding Tucker, I mean, I think there's some minute possibility he actually is CIA and blah, blah, blah. But I think I don't really buy that. I think my assessment is that he's basically, well, first of all, I like Tucker as a person. I want to like him. But my assessment is that he's become a useful idiot, and that at some point in the last 8 years, he's kind of gradually cultivated. And, I think like others before have been, kind of just became that's where the clicks are and that's where the gratification is. Like, I don't think he's a witting Russian agent, but I do think he's been led down this path of where he's become a useful idiot. And one indication of that is that, very little newsworthy information came out of that 2-hour interview. If he was doing real journalism, you'd have a lot more stories pulled out of it. And then all of the fawning of pro-Russia media over the fact of the interview and advertising it. I mean, clearly the interview itself was being instrumentalized by Russian, propaganda from the foreign ministry and all that. So I think he actually needs help. Like, as somebody who likes him and kind of like what he represents on some level, like I want to throw him a rope and be like, or shake him and be like, dude, like you've gone down too far down this path, get back on track. And
well, Jeff, in that regard, real quick, Tucker's commentary on the UFOs, which he implies are aliens and or excuse me, which he implies are like angels, and this, I mean, when people go down that road, for me, it's a bit like, well, I'll see you later.
Totally. It's like
it's
the worst excesses
bizarre.
of Gen X. It's like peak Gen X cringe.
Well, don't blame us for this.
No, I know I'm Gen X too, but yeah, no, he's gone down that path where and it's predictable too. Like, I don't really see him evolving. I just got bored with him, 3 years ago or so, but I had my own evolution. But yeah, I think he's a useful idiot, and I don't think it's witting. I think he kind of personally needs like help. And I don't mean that it sounds patronizing, but I mean that in a genuine way. And the other point I wanted to make is, stepping back, I think I agree with your assessment of Putin. I think your analysis has been really spot on. And I think stepping back, there is like one thing that has changed my perspective is, as geopolitical picture is intensified, like, yeah, America and the quote unquote like woke empire has issues. We're not perfect, but compared to what? Like, would you really rather live in under Putin? No. Would you really rather live in a gerontocratic, digital autocracy in China? Like, no. Would you really rather live in the global South? Like, no. Like, unironically, maybe. Okay, speak for yourself. But that would be king. You could be the king of that would be funny. You could become like the king of the global South or something. But
like,
and that then your arc,
then your
Jamaica
story arc or something.
Then your story arc would be complete.
I mean that kind of seriously. Like, when you said, "Do you want to live in China?" It's like, oh, hell no. They're like, "Do you want to live in like an impoverished tropical paradise?" It's like,
so
maybe.
Yeah. So I think I think in a way there's a vindication moment for like America and our allies and NATO over the last several years that America, AUKUS, NATO, that I think should be acknowledged in this. That's a good thing. And because compared to 5 years ago when geopolitics wasn't intense, I think it was really hard. It was really easy just to be completely critical of America and the West and all this stuff. But yeah, compared to what? So anyway,
no, I basically agree with that. I do think it's interesting. This is on another subject, but I recently read Sheila Fitzpatrick's like short history of the USSR. It's kind of like a 200-page, like real easy read. It's actually good. She's a major historian of USSR, but I did sense through that a lot of parallels. There were a lot of parallels between American society and Soviet society in the 20th century. So you have these two warring factions, but they actually had very similar developments, culturally speaking. I found that interesting. The other thing I have to say, I mean, I endorse Biden. I voted for Biden. I would defend Biden in so many ways, but not vis-a-vis Israel. I kind of like Biden in his goofiness, but I do think he is very old, and it's really becoming a problem. And I think it's even becoming a problem like over the past 3 months. And there's just a lot of these parallels with the Brezhnev era where you have these ancient leaders and they're dying, and there's almost like no sense of what comes after. And I think there are a lot of I agree that the West is best. But I think there are a lot of parallels with Brezhnev era communism with where we are right now. It's like we have these old people. No one really has a compelling futuristic vision. There's a lot of divisive, kind of either left wing or right wing movements out there, kind of underneath. They don't have power, but they have influence. I don't know. I think there are actually a lot of parallels there, and it's a little bit worrisome. Like that was the end of the empire. We should remember.
Well, yeah. I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, with respect to this election, it's sort of the choices between who's worse for the country: the chaotic narcissist,
old guy.
You know, which old guy is more threatening the country? Like, I'm choosing the one who's like somewhat senile and cognitively impaired to a degree, but has a really competent team that even though I don't always agree with, at least they're like really, really competent. I think you said on a separate space, like how we're entering a new phase of American history. And I don't know, that's kind of how I look at it. I do think we're not as serious as we need to be as a country. I started this policy institute, and we were doing a maritime initiative, and like after the post Houthi attack in the Red Sea, and maritime's this huge, key sector that's critical to global trade and geopolitics. And like, we are so far behind, and it's so obvious what needs to be done. There's all this like the Jones Act. It's just really insane. But we're in a way, we're kind of not a serious country on some level. But what I see happening is, as geopolitics intensifies, the minute China, like America is really slow to be proactive from my perspective. Like, I would love for us to attack these issues a lot more aggressively and seriously. And the commercial sector is actually leading the government. Thus, you see SpaceX instead of NASA. But on the other hand, the minute China invades Taiwan, that's going to be the moment things really change. If that does happen, I give it a 50-50 chance, at least in the next 5 years. And that's when America, I think, will have to get serious. And that's when the phase shift that into the next era of our history. And I don't mean that in like a revolution way. I just mean that in kind of a historical era where this older boomer generation will kind of fade into the sunset. New forces will take power. We're going to have some real challenges there. And it will be kind of a, new era of American history. I mean, I think play that picture out. Like, let's, China invades Taiwan. They time that with some efforts that destabilize American infrastructure at the same time. What do we do? Is America serious about responding? Okay, if they do, then what does that look like? And if we don't, then Pax Americana, like what happens then? Like, everything is up for grabs. And that's what we're facing here, in my opinion.
I totally get it. And I was very pro Cold War 2.0 for almost cynical reasons. I mean, I do have genuine sympathy for Ukraine. That's not in dispute. But I also had a kind of cynical take on it, in the sense of like, look, if you're facing nuclear conflict, you have to deal with something just so deadly serious. You don't have time for trans bathrooms or whatever. Like, you just don't. You're not going to discuss this stuff because it's just totally irrelevant vis-a-vis a major power that is threatening. Now, perhaps I was a bit naive. Perhaps I was engaging in wishful thinking, etc. But I do agree with you with that. But I don't know. I wonder if we're just too far gone to coherently deal with geopolitical issues in a positive way. And again, the Brezhnev era, these, the boomers are on like a horizon, and you don't know what's after the boomers. And that's kind of where I am. I have a more gloomy outlook.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair. I think one thing in my eyes is sure, which is I don't think we can do this alone, which is why, and I think one thing we are good at is cultivating, alliances and, operating that way. So that is our best hope. So I'm maybe slightly more optimistic than you are, I think, about these issues.
Yeah.
But the geopolitical picture really, really changes a lot. It's like an issue of resolution. And when you zoom out, if you're just focusing on the US, you could get caught up in all these dumb culture war issues. But if you zoom out and look what's really happening globally, like suddenly those stupid who can use the bathroom or who can teach, like public school, can you say gay or whatever the bill is, like they're really, really dumb distractions that actually weaken us. And right now I see the GOP like not very serious. And as bad as our establishment is, like the Trump, and I supported Trump in 2016, as you know, but the Trump movement proved worse. Like we have to kind of be honest. And there's some dialectic there that's healthy, but right now I think if we're going to improve upon the current establishment, we actually have to be better than they are and not worse and loony. And I think Tucker, in a way, represents, to tie this back there, kind of represents the degradation of a potential counter elite.
Yeah.
And like populism, I mean, sorry to riff here, shut me up, but like I think populism has become this sort of cancer that just reflexively whines about a corrupt elite. And I realized like I was in that mode for a while. And it's just juvenile whining that doesn't accomplish anything, and you're just giving your power away to this corrupt elite. And here I was, like, well-educated, affluent guy, like in DC, fairly well-connected, complaining about the elite. Like, that's ridiculous. You know what I mean? And so my new motto, which is totally cheesy, I think I'm gonna write an essay called "Be the Elite." Be the elite you wish to see.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
I get that.
If that makes sense. If that makes any sense.
No, I totally get that and support that. I wonder the degree to which there's adverse selection going on as well in choosing the elite. I just have a gloomier outlook. I am as well disappointed in the elite, but then as I infamously said about the liberals, like at least they're competent, or they're clearly more competent. I forgot what word I used, or phrase I used. And I do think that Democrats are just simply more competent. Like if there's going to be any policy initiative like healthcare or whatever, it is simply going to come from the Democratic Party. And
totally.
It's just not going to come from the Republicans. So if there's any hope for anything, it's with the Democrats. But I am deeply disappointed in them, and I think there might be a certain kind of adverse selection going on in terms of who is getting promoted. Very self-serving to say on my part, but whatever.
Well, I mean, there is. I mean, if you're on the left, there's been an institutional ladder that's there in a way that in the last 20 to 30 years for Gen X that wasn't there on the right. That's pretty obvious and also true. On the other hand, like I think Tucker is emblematic in my eyes as this sort of Gen X figure on the right who in another era would have been part of the establishment.
Yeah,
certainly. And wasn't, and therefore went on this path that kind of went downward to the point where he's pandering to populists and on this like echo chamber that ultimately it starts out healthy and constructive, like talking about issues that the establishment isn't talking about and having a dissenting voice that can be really healthy. But then going down this path where he's eventually like pandering to people and then becoming a useful idiot, it's kind of sad to me. And what I'm learning is like I'm zagging in the other direction, like rather than culture war bullshit, like let's act partisan rather than culture war and partisan politics. I'm like, let's just solve real problems. And what I'm realizing is that like when people actually solve serious problems and engage, then like that's the way to become a center of gravity and build a network. And there are people interested in doing that. And it's like everything's up for grabs is what I'm what I'm trying to say is like, you can whine about adverse selection of the establishment, but at a certain level, you could also just be the become whatever version of the establishment you want. And that sounds really cheesy, but like, and I know what you're saying about adverse selection, but what I'm trying to impress upon you is like, everything's up. There's a lot that's up for grabs. Like if you want to actually solve problems, like go solve problems. Anybody can be elite in your own, however, I'm being a little cheesy here, but defined in the right way, like you can go solve a problem and claim the elite. Like what makes somebody elite, define that. And so we can deconstruct and then reconstruct what that means. And that's the exercise where I see people going, and on the left and the right, it's not just a right wing thing or whatever, is like reconstructing what it actually means to be elite, not in like a snooty statusy way, but in like a, hey, we actually like a civic virtue kind of way. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Jeff, I find what you just said to be compelling but naive. I mean, to be honest, but extremely well intentioned.
Yeah, I do see some parallels too. Like, in addition to like all this gender stuff, like you see people like in the manosphere distract people from actual issues of talking about like women, and a lot of these freaking red pill influencers have either ties to the FBI, like with Myron Gaines, or with the CIA, with Andrew Tate. But like, I also want to address the issue, and that's
well, are you personally solving this problem, Monolith? Don't you go around and like interview the hottest MILFs at Amfest?
Monolith created this problem, actually.
He is the problem. Be Monolith's motto is be the problem.
That's why Monolith doesn't want. Yeah, he doesn't want these people succeeding at what they do because he's creating it. He's profiting
off the hypocrisy that exists in all of us.
Okay.
But anyway, I also see a parallel. You brought up like comparing the USSR to like modern day like United States. I see a parallel with like modern like just like with Russia, with the Cold War and Russia now, similar to like Germany, but in reverse. Right, you got like the German Empire in World War I having like an arms race, but it was merely imperialistic, and basically like Germany and Britain were basically ideologically the same. It was just nation states formally like trying to compete for who has the most power. And then after Germans defeat in WW1, led the way into like this like phony democracy, and then the rise of like National Socialists, and then you have this new authoritarian ideological regime that led to World War II. I see Russia similar to that, but in reverse. But it starts out with an ideological tyranny, that being communism, and starting the Cold War, and then that collapsing, and now it's like a German imperial system similar to that of like the German Empire, World War I.
That's interesting. It is kind of I see what you're saying there. It's actually a reversal. There's a lot of continuity to Russian history. It is structurally, at the very least, in the sense of the Soviet Union inheriting the Russian Empire and so on. Chatical, you have your black hand raised, so I must call on you.
Yes. Well, first of all, I wanted to give a bit of advice to Lab Rat. When you're talking into your phone, do not hold your microphone like right in front of your face every time you say a P, T, or a P, a T, or a K.
That's just like personal attack. So
no, this isn't a personal attack. This is advice. Hold on. Whenever you say a P, T, or a K, it blows air into the microphone, and it causes. Hey, hold on.
Sorry, but I don't take lessons from niggers.
Stop chimping. It causes your mic to peak, and so if you hold your phone like about a foot away from your face, it will avoid this problem, and it will not have this happen. So you don't have to say that I'm attacking you. He just left because I gave him advice. Holy shit. Anyway, but so Richard, I had a question for you. Who do you think actually did develop the Nordstream pipeline? I've been curious about this, hearing different people's takes and things of that sort.
If I'm just going to go on cui bono alone, I would imagine that Ukraine did it, and I I don't think it's like out of bounds to suggest that the CIA did it or Washington to some degree. But I also get the impression, maybe this is just lip service, but for instance, with the assassination of Dugan's daughter, there was a report in the New York Times where Washington, and this is like people in the know, people with knowledge of the matter or something like that. They said they didn't like this, and this was a Ukrainian action that they don't really want to promote exactly, but they're certainly not going to condemn. And then they also threw in there that Zelensky, his hands are clean. So my impression as an outsider, and I'm not saying this just to be like an America shill as well. My impression as an outsider is that that Washington wants to push, but not push too hard. And Ukraine, understandably, is more desperate, and they want to push as hard as possible and do shocking things. So if you so now again we're like a year out or something like that, or whatever we are. I think probably Ukraine did it, and the United States is certainly not going to condemn it. Did Russia do it? Yeah, did Russia do it? I mean, I wouldn't put that totally outside of the realm of possibilities. It was a dual project with a lot of, I think there's like a Swiss company and a German company, and Russia was like 50-50 or something like this. I wouldn't like totally put that out of the realm of possibilities. No gas was flowing through it. And, but it's a potential, lifeline for Germany of, let's go back to Ostpolitik, that is cheap natural resources from Russia, first world economy in Germany. And, I don't know. I think that's like a 2% chance or a 5% chance. I think it's probably like a 80% chance that Ukraine did it, maybe a 15% chance that like Washington did it. That's kind of how I would put it in my mind.
Weren't there like leaked emails from or text messages from Liz Truss's iPhone where she got a message from some like senior British admiral in the Baltic Sea that was like 90 seconds after the pipeline had been destroyed before it even hit the news, and just it's done, and she's like, thanks. And it's like I don't know, that's not decisive, but it's like kind of compelling evidence that the British or the Americans who are exercises in the area were at least aware of it and probably complicit, even if it was like a Ukrainian paramilitary or Ukrainian naval.
Right.
Actual.
It might have been a reference. Her housekeeper had finished making her bed. I mean, who knows? It is done. Although that is a rather ominous phrase to say for such a mundane activity. But who knows? There might have been knowledge as well of going on. It's a tricky subject. I would kind of stick to my guns of who did it, though.
I think the United Kingdom played a role too, Richard.
That's interesting. I mean, it is something. I mean, Kaiser will always talk about this of, these are NATO allies, and it's the largest act of eco-terrorism or something. I think that's interesting. I mean, Germany just can't respond to any of this. I mean, they just live in the shadow of the Second World War, and it's just it seems to be impossible for them to forcefully respond.
It must be infuriating for a German nationalist. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, just knowing your industry is getting ruined by other people's interests. It's got to be I'd be livid.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, Ostpolitik, do you want to maintain that paradigm forever? I don't know. Techno barbarian, excuse me.
How you doing today, Richard? It's great to talk to you.
Oh, good. It's my man, Donald Trump. I'm back on the train.
That's great to hear. We like to see that. Right? We like to see that. We no more sleepy Joe Biden doesn't even know where Mexico is.
That's true. I mean, I hope in your second term that, Nikki Haley won't, do J6 again. I mean, Nikki Haley did J6 the first time. Would she dare to do it again? I don't know, but that seems to be maybe a pressing concern for when you retake the White House.
Well, Nikki Haley is a dangerous international terrorist. We will be putting her in jail. We will be turning her into some kind of quadruple amputee, like some kind of a hentai creature.
Lampshade. Turn her into a lampshade.
Oh, God. Okay, Jeff. Don't make it worse, Jeff. Do you have a question, Mr. President?
I did just want to ask, how do you think the stuff with now that Ukraine is kind of back in the limelight again? We've kind of, how will Israel respond? There's kind of a war for attention between those two countries right now. They get jealous, right? It's like having two dogs and you're petting one and the other one gets kind of jealous.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. My sense of what might happen with the Republicans is that we get the ultimate shit sandwich. And so there's no border bill that comes up, and there's a lack of Ukraine funding. Maybe. Oh no, my headphones ran out of power again, so I will. Hopefully, I can hear you. Hopefully, that problem from last time won't reoccur. I'll start to charge them. I think there's going to be no border bill. They're not going to actually deal with the issue. I think there might very well be no more Ukraine funding. And I think there'll be a standalone bill for Israel funding, which is what they want. I mean, Matt Gaetz said that explicitly. Why are we funding Ukraine when Israel is in dire peril? Mike Johnson has said similar noises. So I think that's almost what they want. So there are no border bill, so you'll be able to get reelected on while blaming Biden for everything. So you'll like to hear that, and cut off Ukraine and Israel, our greatest ally. A country maybe more American than America itself, Israel, will get full funding to engage in ethnic cleansing.
That's good. What we could do is we could commandeer. What I was thinking, we commandeer the Funko Pop factory, and we, actually scratch that. Those are probably made in China, but we can start making them in America, and we can send them all over to Ukraine. Those, and give it like 5-10 years, those are going to be worth a lot of money. We'll get them like Joker, the cyberpunk Joker. We'll get them all kinds of. We'll get Yosemite Sam, all the coolest Funkos.
It's great stuff. I mean, we could send Ukraine digital playing cards, like that you sell every Christmas. I mean, that it would be a great help. It would inspire. The morale would be boosted immediately. I mean, I think that might be a good idea.
Do
We
we
can
really want
send
to
all
turn?
of Sam Hyde's Mondo megabits to Ukraine.
We're going to turn Ukraine into a country of weebs. They're definitely going to win the war that way. I support it.
Uh-oh. I think Kaiser heard us chatting about Nordstream, Richard.
Okay. Well, he can come up if he wants. I'll do a few more, then I'll take a break. I have a couple of errands I want to run. Let me. I'm going to bring up Klaus. He's connecting right now. Okay, Klaus, do you have something to add? You have to unmute. You have to unmute Klaus, but you can speak if you'd like.
I don't see a Klaus up here.
Oh, well, it's Klaus in blue. I will,
I
Brennan.
don't see him either.
Oh my God, this app is so buggy. God, Musfis is all right. Brennan, you have the floor.
I just wanted to say in rebuttal to some of what I heard a little bit earlier from Jeff. You know, there's if someone wants to push things and say that social issues don't matter at all, that that's fine. And I know Jeff might be coming from a very different position because of obviously he's very I don't know how to put it, very very establishment, and I guess it's completely okay to be establishment, but let's not pretend that you're a part of the change when you are such a creature of the establishment as he is. And what I also thought was in terms of what's happened in Ukraine. I was in Ukraine before the war happened, on multiple parts of Ukraine, and my perspective is the Western Ukrainians are getting what they wanted. The Eastern Ukrainians did not want this war. They were victimized by all the things that started to happen. There was a protest against the coup. People started getting killed. You know what I'm saying? That's pretty serious. They asked for some independence, a small measure of independence, not full independence. And what started to happen was, and was going on for quite a long time, was the shelling of the city centers of East Ukraine. So while I think this war has generally been bad for West Ukraine, it started out really horribly for the Eastern Ukrainians. And now I think things have turned around, and they're back to being worse for the Western Ukrainians. But the Western Ukrainians have been getting kind of like what they sowed. They decided to be puppets of the West. They decided to be complicit in a coup. They decided to change their election.
What coup are you talking about? 2014?
The Maidan coup. But more than that, though, Zelensky's peace and reconciliation position turned into right sectors. Let's go kill these dang Russians on the east. You know what I'm saying? And that's exactly what they pursued. Now it's tragic. I think it's incredibly tragic what's happened to the Western Ukrainians, but let's not absolve them of their own personal responsibility in making these disastrous mistakes.
Well, okay. I mean, do you don't blame Putin for invading Ukraine?
I view it completely as a defensive action.
A defensive action due to stuff going on in the Donbass since 2014?
Well, I view Ukraine as always part of the Russian sphere of control and influence, and so I view the encroachment of NATO as a very dangerous thing, because I think it can trigger a war. And I felt like when Jeff was talking, I felt personally attacked, because I'm actually taking what is more of a moderate position, but most of my time in the military was spent training to kill Russians. And I find it kind of ironic that someone would come onto these spaces and take an establishment position around, let's just keep on throwing money at this war in perpetuity. And also, I think there was a little bit of the other thing that I heard that really bothered me was let's talk about the competence of the current administration. Well, the current administration's been pretty good to me. I'll say this much. If you look at what's going on in terms of salaries and stuff like that for people around DC and Northern Virginia, things aren't bad, okay? But on the other hand, I'll say this much. Let's not chalk this up as a highly successful administration either at the same time too. I don't think people have to talk about maps and where things are or what's been happening in various locations, whether it's inflation or Afghanistan or other different things. I don't view this as the most successful administration. So,
okay, look, Ukraine had a referendum in 1991 in which they overwhelmingly voted for independence. And this led directly to the collapse of the USSR and the rise of the Russian Federation. So I get the notion that Ukraine is pretty Russian when it comes to history, but you can say that about many other places as being pretty German or pretty French, and they aren't. They're either independent or they're, I guess, in the case of something like Königsberg, part of the Russian sphere at the moment. So it just is what it is. And you don't have some like primordial right to something. I mean, if you're going to argue that, then we've got to give a lot of North America back to the Cherokee. And I just all of this notion. I mean, you saw this with Putin of like we have to ask his permission to expand NATO, and we need to negotiate, or whether Ukraine can be truly independent or not. We need to ask him first. I mean, I'm sorry, but I just find that ridiculous.
I don't think we have to worry about
Well,
the
the
expansion
Cherokees
of.
didn't have a nuclear arsenal. If they did, I would advocate for giving them some land back. But I mean,
Ukraine gave up its nuke.
Eastern Ukraine was firmly Russian patrimonial lands. I mean, most people, their last names are Russian. They pronounce words in the Russian way. They
Well,
speak
you can
Russian. They
say,
write
yeah,
Russian.
Zach,
They dream in Russian.
you're
I mean, I would agree with you.
you're doing the exact thing that I just said. Like, you can
Well,
say
I
that
know, but
about
like
much parts of Poland being
I
German.
support those imperial designs because I like who's going to want to go to nuclear war over 10 million, 15 million people in a country that's so corrupt and going to get ripped apart? I mean, let the wolves have at it. And that's the US allowing Poland, Romania, and Hungary to eat their peace finally. Because why would NATO get involved in this conflict if not for something to their benefit? So a radically unstable Ukraine benefits no one. So I just think that NATO is basically going to take advantage of Russian aggression here to sort of expand their footprint, marginalize Ukrainian sovereignty along with Russia. And I think this
Isn't
could be a huge
Texas
shift.
like a primordial ancestral land of Mexico?
Well, it
No, it
is,
was
yeah, and
conquered.
I would agree. But
We
but
won.
the U.S.-Mexican War basically decided that Spanish Mexico lost it.
Well, did the
And
collapse of the Soviet Union not decide it as well?
well, yes, but I mean, Russia remains a nuclear state, and so for me, the biggest concern that no one ever really brings up because it is a little bit spurgy military stuff is that you need to have a radius for your missile defense shield, and having a NATO Ukraine up until the border of Russia and Ukraine currently is an unacceptable margin. That's not enough for Russian missiles to respond for their air defense. It's a strategic threat. So I mean, you have to go to war if you're Putin. You didn't want to, but you absolutely had to in order to guarantee that you would have room for your air defense. Otherwise, NATO's right on you, and they can basically just lob missiles at Moscow, and you won't be able to do anything about it. So I mean, you have to have that land. You just have to have it with a hostile Ukraine.
I mean, I don't disagree with you in the sense of Russia's strategic interest. I mean, I've said this many times. The Eastern Europe is a kind of funnel like action towards the steppes, and if there's going to be a European army or a German army that marches on Russia, it would funnel through Ukraine, and it could engage in a sort of knockout blow because Russia is just not a nation state. I mean, it is inherently an empire. It could be divvied up like a lot of Western Europe is, but that's not
Yeah,
what it's
especially
been
when
traditionally.
Okay, Richard, can I just chime in here very quickly?
Sure.
Richard, I respect you very much. I think I'm talking now philosophically here, a little bit blunt. I think, Richard, you and I, we understand each other on a subconscious level. This whole Western Europe bullshit must stop. And I know, I believe you when you say, and I see you. I see you are, in your heart, you are German.
Yeah.
And this whole Western Europe, what is Western Europe? What is Western Europe at the end of the day? It's UK, and it's some kind of notion of French intelligentsia. And their only objective was always to never let the Germans unite. This is NATO, basically. That is NATO. And that must stop. And look,
No.
we can have
Okay,
the beef
hold
with the
on.
Russians here.
Hold on.
Wait, let me just. I get where you're coming from. You don't have to laugh the Russians. I get you. But the thing is, we must respect each other's turf here. And I respect the Russian turf, and Ukraine. The problem with Ukraine is and Richard, if you would be here, you would despise them. How they're grifting their way through everything. Honestly, Richard, you would really despise them when you see what's going on. And I'm sick of them. I'm sick of them grifting their way, and then whenever it suits them, one day one day they will play the Nazi card, or you don't. You have to support us because your grandpa was marching through our step. The other day they will try to allude to something else. The thing is, Richard, I understand where you're coming from. I respect you for that, but as everyone on this planet Earth, we all have our blind spots. I have my blind spots, you have your blind spots. And Richard, you are not Chuck. Chuck is different. Chuck is a typical, and I respect him for that. He's a wasp imperialist. You are not. And I think you betted on the wrong horse here with Ukraine. I'm just telling you, they are not what they pretend to be. They are pretentious, grifting motherfuckers. And I have to, Richard, I have to say it out loud. And I will tell you one thing. Yes, obviously, when, in 40, 41, 42, 43, we use them. Obviously, you use every tool you can get.
Mm-hmm.
But no German ever respected those Ukrainians because they were selling out their own. And that's a big difference to, let's say, to the Hungarians, where I have respect for them, even to the Croatians in that regard, or to the Finns. I have no respect to the Ukrainians who were selling out their own brothers and cousins. I must say that very bluntly, Richard. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I appreciate the bluntness. Okay, I would add one thing in terms of, you could say, the Anglo tendencies and NATO and what NATO represents. I totally agree with you in the sense that there is a long-term Anglo objective of preventing the uniting of the continent. And that was the objective against Napoleon. That was the objective against Hitler as well, who the parallels between Napoleon and Hitler are actually quite remarkable when you think about it. And it's very interesting with Maggie Thatcher. She was opposed to the reunification of Germany in the 89 to 91 period. And she said this bluntly. Many Poles were as well. There are all these weird details about that period where things are really in flux. So I agree that that's there.
But Richard, you know who was in favor of the unification? I told it earlier in the space today. George Bush Senior and James Baker. They really said, "Guys, go ahead." And I appreciated that came out of the heart. This was without any kind of, let's say, preconditions to it. They really said, "Okay, Helmut, if you want to reunite, go ahead." And even Mitterrand, and Mitterrand was the best, like basically Kohl and Mitterrand, you know that, they were BFFs. Even Mitterrand had his, let's say, considerations. And Thatcher, you described her very well. She even tried to bribe Gorbachev to say no to the reunification. I will never forget that, Richard. I cannot forget that.
Right. So this is what I'm saying. So NATO arose during the Berlin crisis. And NATO arose in a way, very interestingly, in a kind of pro-German way. So I can't believe I'm praising the Kennedy family, but I will here. In the famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech that John F. Kennedy gave By the way, as an aside here, Kaiser, if I say ich bin ein Berliner, would you say that means I'm a jelly donut? Or would you understand what I'm
No.
saying?
That was awesome. Ich bin ein Berliner. You pronounced it perfectly. Awesome.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But there is in the United States, there's this notion that he said I am a jelly donut, ein Berliner, as opposed to saying ich bin Berliner. But from what I know, I speak German, but I don't speak it. I'm not a native, of course. But I think that's over exaggerated. I don't think everyone, like, they were cheering in Berlin. If he said I'm a jelly donut, I don't think they were
Richard,
getting to
believe me,
their feet cheering.
every Berliner understood him perfectly well.
Yeah.
And they appreciate it because I think he said it out of the heart.
Yes.
Really
And he said this. He said, the greatest thing you could ever have, the greatest passport you could say, or identity you could ever have, would be a citizen of Rome. And now the greatest passport you could have is you could say, I'm a citizen of West Berlin. No, that was, 20 years after Hitler and a World War. I mean, it's a remarkable thing how pro-German, in a goodwill way, it was. So I think NATO itself, I mean, remember, a reunified Germany just entered NATO. So I think making just like colliding some Anglo tendency, which I completely admit is there, and NATO itself, I think is just simply incorrect.
I mean, but Richard, don't forget, JFK was proud, and he was very proud of his Irish heritage. He was not. I think he was a power against the WASP elite, JFK. And I mean, whatever it is,
his father was pro-Hitler, actually.
I mean,
some degree.
Yeah. I mean, there is a certain kind of Irish German kind of understanding in certain regards when it comes to the British Empire. But anyway, I mean, which is all I'm saying is, I think you're coming from the right place of your heart, but I just wish that we can. I don't want to conquer the world. That is stupid. But I just wish to have own agency for my people again. That would be awesome. Like, hey, and then we can be friends. And I just wish, because the United States, as I said it so many times, the United States is so strong. You have so much potential. You don't have to play the same kind of games or strategies like the Brits did. The Brits had to play that games because when you back it down, what was the British Empire? It came from a backward island. It came up from a backwater island, and but you are not. You're the United States of America, and you could basically treat others completely different than the Brits ever could. The only way that the Brits ever could rule India was basically by playing each faction against each other. The United States don't have to do that. You don't have to do that because you're strong intrinsically. And the Brits never were strong in that regard, in the way America is strong. Just think about it a little bit.
Yeah, I understand. I think that there could be an outcome from this. And I've admitted that maybe this is just simply wishful thinking on my part. But an outcome out of a Cold War scenario, Cold War 2.0, that would be a united Europe and North America vis-a-vis Russia and China. And I think that, I mean, there's all these complaints of, we're losing China, we're losing Russia, the world is no longer unipolar. I find that to be good, to be honest. And I would like a European Union and a North American Union, in effect, vis-a-vis, 1.5 billion Chinese and 140 million Russians, if they want to link up in that way. I think that would actually be a positive step. But I say that a bit cynically, to be honest. I think that would just be good for our hearts and minds, in the sense that it's not just an Americanized, globalized world. There actually are enemies out there. And battling over where that border is a part of that. But don't be too harsh on the Ukrainians. I mean, come on. I met some Ukrainian refugees here in Montana, believe it or not. They got all the way out here.
No,
I had a
no,
Russian
They seemed
obviously,
like
refugee.
very
yeah.
nice people.
I had a
Look,
Russian
obviously,
refugee as a roommate
the
who
average Ukrainian
came here to avoid the
is
war.
a humble person. No, 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 don't get me wrong. When I'm talking about I'm talking about Ukrainians, I'm talking about those who are setting the agenda, and they are so sleazy, Richard.
Western
I
Ukrainians.
cannot respect them, Richard. I have a hard time to respect people who are so sleazy and who try to play every game, every card. And there was, that was interesting. There was once last year there was an old German tanker, and he was talking about the battle of the what was it? Ardennes offensive. How you call it in English? A battle of the Bulge.
Battle of the
Yes,
Bulge,
and he
yes.
was saying, "You look, as a young tanker, I just wanted to get out of it, to get out alive, And then this stupid motherfucker Andriy Melnik, Ukrainian ambassador to Germany, he was literally on Twitter writing, "How dare this old Nazi question anything?" I mean, the absolute disrespect. It really bugs me. I don't know. It really bugs me the wrong way that people who are getting everything, and honestly, they are being treated as deluxe premium kind of refugees or allies or procs or whatever you want to call them, and still the absolute entitlement, the ungratefulness. I'm honestly, Richard, it really rubs me the wrong way. I must be honest about that.
I understand. All right. Well said.
Wait, I have a question for you, Richard, really quickly.
Sure.
Can you look at the Jumbotron? There's a
It's okay,
claim
Richard.
made
We don't
by...
have to agree here. This is okay. I actually liked our back and forth very much, and it's important to have let's say, a good debate, a good dialectical kind of debate, but coming from a good faith position. That's important, and
Correct.
and everything else. I mean, hey, this is how we as humanity, as
And
human
look,
species,
Kaiser,
evolve.
I'm a Germanophile. I mean, I am a Nietzsche fanboy. I have Wagner albums on vinyl. That's how bad it is. I have the
He
complete
has a swastika tattoo.
on my face.
Disavow?
Yes, on my forehead, just like Charles Manson style. No, I have Beethoven's 9 symphonies conducted by Karajan. Yeah, like this is how bad it is. I'm a total Germanophile. So it's impossible for me to not think in terms of the best interest of Germany, because I think Germany's contribution to culture and world history is really unsurpassed. So yeah, that's where
Thank you,
I'm coming
Richard.
from.
Honestly,
I'm
that
not
makes
saying
me
that diplomatically. I'm saying that just from the
it
heart.
made me
Yeah,
smile, and it made me think of
yeah,
Voltaire, and I always will keep this one quote of Voltaire in my heart. When he was talking about Prussia, he was saying it was Sparta in the morning and Athens in the afternoon. And yeah,
yeah.
that is what we should aspire to, the combination of both aspects, not only Sparta, but also Athens. Both should come together. And that is how to say what Prussia and Germany in extension should aspire to. And this is why I don't like Adolf Hitler. I made it very clear, because basically what he did is he took the best out of that spirit.
You're
And when
you're going out on a limb here, Kaiser. You've come out
I'm sorry.
against
I
Hitler.
will stop. I will
Yeah,
just. I will not go too far.
He always
I'm just saying he
spurs
took the
on it.
best out of it, and then when he didn't get his way, he was literally saying, and it's verbatim. He said, "Let them all die." They were too weak to basically fulfill a division. And after
He's a
millions
lapo.
of men died, and people sacrificed everything, to hear your leader saying that, I mean, what kind of person is that? This is
He's a
something
lapo.
which many people don't understand, but it's really, yeah, but Richard, I think you know where I'm coming from here.
yeah, yeah.
I think you understand me. Okay, all right.
So I
All
got a
right.
question.
Thank you. So
Okay,
Chadical, yeah.
thank you, Richard. I don't want to occupy the space too much.
No, it's
Obvious
fine.
has his hands raised. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Richard.
Yeah. Chadical has a question, then I'll go to obvious.
Yeah. So if you take a look at the Jumbotron, the claim has been made by Zherka that they were in front of a green screen, and he posted this evidence about how the shadow warps around Tucker's shoulder in his suit. What's your opinion of this? Is there any implications to this being recorded in front of a green screen and not like in some sort of palace or whatever? Or what's your 2 cents here? Do you think that like they were actually inside of Russia when they were recording the interview? Like what I don't know. This
Well,
this
well,
this
hold on.
raises
So
questions on me.
I've actually used a green screen once or twice, but I mean, I'm like, or more than that, but I'm a total amateur. Is that a regular thing for a
It's
war?
got to be. It has to be. It has to be camera lighting, and the rest of the room has to be dark, and the mantle could create a shadow like that. In fact, like I'm looking at my own, and if I were to like take a lamp, like a powerful lamp, and shine it down from both sides, it would emanate a similar shadow. Chadical, Kaiser, yell at him.
No, no,
Where's
no, no.
Kaiser?
I'm not trying to save it.
No. Look.
I was just wondering what
Okay,
thoughts
I
this
would
brought to
say this.
mind. That's all. Because I
I
saw it and I
think
was like,
it's.
huh, interesting.
I think it's like a distinction without a difference. Like, even if I were to grant you that it was all done in a green screen, I mean, what does it matter that much?
Well, I mean, that's the point. I was just wondering what your thoughts on it were,
Yeah,
not
I mean,
necessarily that it even does matter.
I'm not a expert on video technology, so I mean, that does look a bit weird if that is an unmanipulated photo. But even if I were to grant everything, it's still kind of like, well, he interviewed him in a television studio. Like, what is it? It might be interesting. Like, is Putin hiding out somewhere, like in a bunker? That would be an interesting tidbit if
Yeah,
true.
that's
But
what I was thinking. It's like, did they take
you know,
him
there's all
somewhere
that
else outside of
stuff.
the palace?
I see pro-Ukraine accounts tweet out this like there are multiple Putins and like their body doubles who've had plastic surgery. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't put that past the Russian state. I mean, I could kind of see them doing that, but I don't know. It's odd, but that seemed to be the actual Putin. It seems like if they had some actor performing as Putin, he would have been more interesting. You know, so that seems to be evidence against the notion that they're.
Unless they're trying to be very authentic, Richard, make it even more boring. Therefore, he's a great actor.
Right, that's true. Yeah, Putin was like,
No,
God,
but I think
Putin at home, he's like, this man sucks. He is extremely boring in his historical pedantry. I would never be like that. I would have gone hardcore, as they say in the States, on tranny bathrooms. It must be said.
I mean, I would entertain this as much as like when people on the right say that there are body doubles of Joe Biden.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
It's a similar type.
I mean,
story.
seriously, women in men's sports. I mean, it's kind of hot when you think about it, but nevertheless. Okay.
Exactly. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was just curious, like, what it kind of brings to mind when you see something like that.
Yeah. Obvious. You have the floor.
Have you got me, guys?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry, new telephone, so a little bit teething issues. Yeah, just getting back to the interview with Putin. I found it interesting when Tucker brought up China, and Putin basically sung China's praises. He started rattling off economic statistics. China's now the biggest country economy in the world as of 10 years ago, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just really shows how beholden Russia is to China now that the Western sanctions have basically reorientated their economy. And John McCain once said that Russia is a gas station. And it's seeming like the only cars that are allowed to fill up that gas station now are like the third world, maybe a little bit, Africa, and the second world China thing as well. So my point would be that Russia is a backwater. It's a geopolitical backwater now. The real foe is China. And as much as Ukraine and everything like that, we either need to do Russia quickly or we need to make peace with them and get them on side for this showdown with China.
Yeah, it was interesting because Putin treated the Chinese as no threat at all. He was like, "Ah, very reasonable people. They don't engage in imperialism or so on." Which, there's some truth to that claim, but it seems extremely naive, in fact.
And he was lecturing Americans because they had the gall to recognize China as a threat, which is ridiculous. Like, China's obviously the biggest adversary that America has right now, and it's unspoken thing to say. As someone who's personally been affected by Chinese sanctions, my family's been affected by Chinese tariffs that were put on in the last 3 years.
Interesting.
In my I hate the fuckers. Like, it's the way we've grown dependent on the Chinese and the way they operate their economy. Good on them for doing it, but we're pretty stupid to have let it happen. And the only way we can extricate ourselves from this issue is basically to make them submit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how anyone in their right mind could view China as anything other than a threat. And I also think Putin is being just excessively naive. I mean, at the end of the Second World War, when Mao visited Moscow, obviously Moscow had the upper hand. I mean, Mao was a kind of like, apprentice, or you'll take the East, we'll take the West, kind of thing like that. When Xi visits Russia, I mean, there's no doubt who has the upper hand, just in terms of population, economy, size of the army. Just it's remarkable. So I don't know. I can't believe that Putin doesn't see the possibility of just being swallowed by the dragon as well. But
maybe
maybe he wants that. Who knows? It'd be just, it'd be another autistic technocratic society that he could be a part of. But that would obviously be a total disaster from the standpoint of any Russian nationalist. I don't know. I mean, I think China's a massive threat. And I genuinely hope that there is some kind of Taiwan crisis, because I think a long-term end of Chimerica would be a good thing. Just massive sanctions, ending of production in China, moving towards production on the continent that is North American continent or the European continent. I think that is just I think a full-on confrontation with China would be a fantastic thing, devoutly to be wished. And I have to say, as much criticism as I have of the Russians, the Chinese, that is like the most awful thing I could imagine. Like, living in that type of technocratic, quantitative ant society. I mean, it is an abomination. And I think Chinese having greater power in the world is just a terrible thought. So yeah, I genuinely hope for a hot conflict and something a real serious. We just recognize just the sort of spiritual and cultural death that type of society represents, and that we can move away from it. And I would love for this iPhone that I'm using right now not to be made there. And
let's make it in Brazil instead. How about that?
Well, that would be better. I mean, there's some other options, but I think the Chimerica arrangement is, going to be looked back upon.
Richard, now that you've said that, I just like you to ponder for a second what seems to be our funding priorities. We're throwing money at the Western Ukrainians to attack Russians, who we've basically forced into the arms of the Chinese. Yet you just gave a very eloquent little mention of how the Chinese are are a threat, but our funding priorities aren't aligned with who's really the threat.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure we forced Russia into China's arms. I mean, before Nixon and Kissinger went to China, there was a very strong alliance. There's a historical precedent and continuity there. I mean, I think allowing Russia into NATO in the 90s would have been a positive thing. It didn't happen. Putin seems a little bit bitter. That's fair enough, understandable. But if Putin wants to throw his lot in with BRICS and China, then I mean, I don't know what to say. It's kind of like, see you later. I mean, you are going to be swallowed up by the dragon. And if you want that and you are consciously doing that, I just have no sympathy.
Well, I mean, historically, China hasn't really been a sort of an invasionary empire outside of their immediate confines. And if you think about what's happened in northern China and Siberian areas, there was an issue. I would agree with you. Like 20, 25 years ago, people were really concerned that there was going to be some sort of conflict, but people sort of figured out what to do. Like a lot of the Chinese men and women would get jobs on the Russian side, and it would benefit them. They'd make more money, and then like they'd marry, they'd intermarry, they'd have a family, and basically you just dilute the animosity through like relations, like
that is an
having a child.
appalling and just disgusting prospect. I mean, you're
Yeah,
just going to
well, but I mean,
become
like,
Chinese. I mean,
well, no, I mean, so
there's a
what
billion
happens
and a
is,
half of them and 140 million Russians. What
well,
is
no,
going to happen?
but so here's the
Are you
thing.
Chinese or
That
Japanese?
started to die off a little bit because Chinese demographics aren't really in the favor of this argument. In fact, the population's shrinking,
Yeah.
and they're going to be less and less capable militarily of conquering or taking over any large swaths of
Well, you
land.
can say the same thing
So
about
they're very
Russia.
much,
I mean, Russia's
well,
population is
exactly, but
dwindling.
Russia exerts, but where Russia's population, military, and economic, financial, and industrial centers are, the Urals basically and west, that's much closer geographically to Eastern Europe than say like China is, other than the Pacific Rim states, to any U.S. interests, other than like I just said, Japan and Korea and Taiwan. So, and even still, there's a lot more hurdles there. You can't move in large amounts of military vehicles into any of those areas. Everything basically requires Navy and so on. So it's way more cumbersome. Whereas like with Russia and Ukraine, it's a massive land front. So you can bring in big combined forces. So I think like U.S. engagement against China makes way more sense than Russian engagement against China or Chinese engagement against Russia. But yeah, Richard, I mean, like I sort of tend to agree with the Taiwan. It's sort of like either shit or get off the pot now. If you can prove that you can unify economically and politically, well, then that should happen in the next decade or two. If not, you're right. They're going to have to go to war over it because I think, given the chip market, the United States still can't afford to lose Taiwan at all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Chip Act is all well and good, but I think that's made a dent, maybe. But I just genuinely despise the Chinese. I think it's a horrible culture, and it also just the total lack of creativity, the just stealing of industrial espionage and so on. It's just they're just appalling, and I don't know. I mean, heaven help us if we enter like a Sino world or something. That is just the deadening of the human spirit and so on. I don't know. I'm not one of these nationalists. It's like, oh, multipolar world, trad and you live and let live, and you be you. I'm okay. That's all ridiculous. The strong do what they want, the weak do what they can. I do not. Yeah, I do this like let's let China be China. It's not. All right, I think I am going to wrap it up. I'm not going to do one of these massive marathon spaces that Zag does. I'm going to wrap it up, and I have to do some errands and get a little work done. But yes, good space.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you guys, and I
Thank
will
you.
talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
See you.